time no see.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start from the beginning. Where does Brian Wice come from?
The north end of Hartford, Connecticut. I grew up in a very middle-class, comfortable enclave that was straight out of Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best. Middle child, older sister, younger brother, mom and dad who were members of what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. Childhood sweethearts. Mom graduates from high school, dad drops out, enlists in the service, is a member of the Fifth Army, and is decorated in combat for a number of battles. Anzio, Salerno, Palermo, and notwithstanding the fact that he never made it past the 10th grade, was proud that he got his GED. That's the backstory. I guess it was a latchkey kid before we knew what latchkey kids were.
Well, I didn't know that, but I know you made your way to Houston. How did you get there?
You know, the joke is getting away from the cold New England weather and a nice Jewish mother. I mean, obviously, loved mom, loved dad, but wasn't a real big fan of New England winters. We lived on one of the tallest hills in the north end of Hartford, and we would sit by our living room window and watch knuckleheads try to navigate this monumental hill in sleet and snow and ice. And I remember getting paid like 25 cents to shovel snow, and I thought there's got to be a better way. And so
humidity in Houston was the better way?
Well, it's like, Houston's like Vietnam without the ambiance, but I've realized that part of the collegiate experience meant leaving home. If it had been up to my mom and dad, I'd have gone to the University of Connecticut, terrific school, but the University of Connecticut is in a little town called Storrs in eastern Connecticut that makes College Station look like Vegas. And I thought that part of that experience needed to be to go halfway across the country, and I did. Had never seen Houston or the University of Houston campus or the state. The farthest I'd ever been away from home, I think, was Boy Scout camp when I was 14.
Wow. Well, it's quite a contrast from Connecticut. But tell everybody where you went to law school.
Well, I went to undergrad in law school because undergrad kind of forms the backstory for how I wound up going to law school. I went to the University of Houston and immediately changed majors from sociology. As topical as today's headline, sociology is a Latin phrase that means you're going to work at Dave & Buster's with a degree. And became a sports writer. One of the kids who sat next to me in this big pharmacy class that non-science majors took for an easy A was a sports editor at the Daily Cougar. And I had told him I'd written in high school, and he said, come on out. And I started at the bottom of the food chain at the school newspaper and worked my way up to be an editor and a columnist and traveled with the football and basketball teams. And
wow.
The backstory is this. I decided a generation or two before anybody knew who Jerry Maguire was, I wanted to be a player agent. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to represent ball players. And then, of course, I recognized that unless you're an AAU travel coach or your uncle is the director of player personnel at Ole Miss, you've got a better shot of dating Jessica Alba than signing these kids. And so it was enough to convince me that maybe I should go to law school. And I did, and I fell in love with criminal law.
Wait a minute. Where's the connection from ball players and law
Because
school?
I realized that even though it was highly improbable that I was going to become a player agent, you needed a law degree.
Okay.
That was the best way from what I was told.
Okay.
I had become friends with one of the major player agents at the time, the late Bob Wolf, and had set him up with one of my friends who was a tremendous basketball player, Otis Birdsong. And in exchange for sending Otis to Bob Wolf, where Bob negotiated a $1 million contract, what did I get? Oh yeah, a plane ticket back to Connecticut. But it was ultimately enough for me to realize perhaps law school was a more hospitable venue than moving to Lubbock and working for $10 grand a year as a sports writer for the Lubbock Avalanche Journal.
Well, there's nothing wrong with Lubbock.
Not at all. Nothing wrong with the Avalanche Journal.
So you go to U of H Law School with the mind towards maybe continuing to do the sports agent thing, and then how do you get to criminal law?
Well, once I was kind of disabused of the notion of the whole sports agency thing, criminal law, everybody knows what we take the first semester: property, torts, legal research and writing, and it's...
Of all those choices.
Yeah, and really, I had a really terrific criminal law, criminal pro professor, and Irene Rosenberg, and I thought, this is what interests me. There's just something about the underlying narrative. And I was fortunate enough to become a member of the law review. Not because of grades, even though I was in the top 50%, but the writing competition. Because the whole sports writing backstory was important, because it's one of the talents that the good Lord gave me, was the ability to write, to reason, and later on in life to argue, to get people to pay you to do it. And I interviewed with a couple of big firms because, and only because, I was law review. And they looked at me, and I figured, they'd have a better chance of hiring Son of Sam than calling me back.
Well, but you did start out at a pretty prestigious firm, right?
I started out at a two-person law firm, Woody and Rosen, Clyde Woody, Marion Rosen, who really were among the first, the trailblazers in criminal law and criminal defense in Houston. And I was fortunate enough because I went to a job interview with one of my law school buddies, Phil Zellicoe, who went on to become the executive director of the 9/11 Commission. I mean, professor in residence at the University of Virginia, incredibly smart. But I went on 3 different interviews with him because at the time I had a car and he didn't. And each of those 3 interviews wound up with jobs, working for Woody and Rosen, becoming an intern in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then becoming a briefing attorney at the Court of Criminal Appeals. But Woody and Rosen were involved in appellate litigation because the city of Houston had outlawed porno bookstores and massage parlors within certain portions of the city. They challenged a lot of that litigation. I became involved in that, and it just was something I was fascinated with.
So from Marion Rosen's office, you went where?
I became an intern with the United States Attorney's Office.
I heard you say that, and I thought that's a scary
It is, well, because at the time, once again, I went on a job interview with Phil, who still didn't have a car, and Phil was going to be hired by Tony Canales from Corpus. Tony, a member of TCDLA, just a legendary criminal defense attorney, pound for pound, one of the best, but he had become the United States Attorney. Jimmy Carter had appointed him, and I accompanied Phil on the job interview. He had given Phil a job spot later on after he had finished his clerkship, and he's like, "Do you want to be an intern?" I'm like, "Intern? Sure." But the joke was that it was okay for him to hire me as an intern, but he knew I couldn't pass an FBI background check as an assistant. And that was my initial foray into prosecuting, which of course kind of comes full circle later.
So how did you get into your own practice? I mean, did you leave there and go out on your own?
No, I had the best job that I've ever had in my life as a lawyer, and that was as a briefing attorney, law clerk at the Court of Criminal Appeals, the state's highest court for criminal cases in Austin. And once again, Phil and I got in my car and both interviewed, and the way that it worked at the time was there were 9 judges, 20 people got callbacks. You submitted your name to the court as a whole, and then they scheduled 5-minute interviews over the course of an afternoon in October. Phil was the first one in, I was the second. There were supposed to be 5-minute interviews, and you sat around the conference table, and I'm looking at these 9 judges, and the room was as all, male, white, and democratic as the locker room at Augusta Country Club, and I'm thinking, wow, all right, you can do this. And I was in there for 10 minutes, and I don't know whether they found me entertaining or...
I'm sure that they did.
And the way that it worked is you finished the interview, drove back to Houston later that day in order of seniority from then presiding Judge Onion to the rookie judge, Sam Houston Clinton. They made their choices as if it was the NFL draft. And I'll never forget getting the call from Judge Sam Houston Clinton telling me that he had chosen me. And I asked him, I said, well, obviously I'm thrilled, but why me? There are a bunch of qualified people. He said, what impressed me about you, other than the fact that you were funny, is that as a sports writer, you were used to writing and writing on deadline. And I thought that's something that was going to help me, particularly as a newer judge. And I worked for Judge Clinton for 13 months. We made $13,500, and it was all the money in the world. It was the greatest job that I've ever had. Forget about like the money and the pub and everything like that. Working for Judge Clinton from August 1st of 1979 to September 1st of 1980 was an incredible experience, and a job that on a daily basis I sometimes wish I could transition back to. And that was important because as a briefing attorney at the court, they heard all kinds of criminal cases. The courts of appeals didn't get criminal jurisdiction until 4 years later. So you had the right to argue almost any and everything, from the most ridiculous guilty plea extradition cases to the death penalty, which had then been reenacted by the legislature and upheld by the Supreme Court. So I saw great lawyers, I saw horrible lawyers, and I saw everybody in between, but I thought to myself, this is what I want to do.
So from there, I mean, you left the court, obviously.
I had an opportunity. I had 3 job offers. I had a chance to stay in Austin and work for the Attorney General in the Habeas Division. Mark White, who went on to become governor, I had become good friends, that means dated his executive assistant, and had an offer from the AG, had an offer from Bill Mobley, who was the district attorney in Nueces County in Corpus, and then an offer as a professor in charge of the trial ad program at the University of Houston. They were offering 20. The AG was offering 17.5. The DA was offering like 15, and I thought, wait a second, this is easy, this is math. And moved back to Houston and had 4 students my first year and sent them out into the criminal justice system. And it was pretty much a train wreck.
So
and
Professor Wice?
Professor Wice did that for a year. But one of my students in that first semester was a young man named Kent Schaefer, who kind of figures into my biographical narrative later on down the line.
Well, let's just touch on something really quickly. Your marital status
still Houston's most eligible Jewish bachelor, which is, as people have said, is an honor on the same level as, you know, being the coolest Osmond brother or the smartest Kardashian sister. But it's funny because my parents were married 58 years, both sets of grandparents over 50. So I've always believed that I have the marriage gene, but it's like alcoholism or baldness. It skips a generation, so it skipped me.
It skipped you. Okay, so you're in Houston, the 70s, 80s?
No, it's
80s.
Actually the 80s.
Let's
It's the
forward. Well, and let's let people know. I mean, you have 35 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Of experience in criminal law, almost exclusively.
Licensed May 28, 1979. You're at the court. You're as a professor, adjunct at U of H, and then realized that I wanted to be out there actually trying cases or appealing cases as opposed to trying to direct my students to where the men's room was at the Criminal Justice Center.
And let's talk a little bit about that. I know you tried a few cases, and people need to know that that actually occurred, because I don't know if the statutes run out on some of those. But and then how you transitioned into these bigger cases that you're known for today.
I mean, I was fortunate because when I first started out, you could actually make what passed for a living doing nothing but court appointments. There was no fee schedule. There weren't nearly as many other defense attorneys with mouths to feed. And, you could do an appeal and a motion to revoke probation and get a check for $3,500, which was a lot of money in those days. But it was important to supplement doing appointed appeals with trial appointments. I mean, and you start out and they give you the most horrible cases imaginable. I mean, the damned and the downtrodden. The burglar in the building at high noon with 6 nuns and a couple of rabbis who are, on viewing this crime as it happens. And I always wondered why it was that lawyers like Dick DeGuerin and Jerry Goldstein had all these great fact situations, and lawyers like me had the burglar in the building at One Shell Plaza, and got to meet some of the judges and, more importantly, their coordinators, and was able to use appellate work as a touchstone to try to build a practice and a name and a reputation. And I think really what was one of the critical turning points was after 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, like my ancestors, I became friends and office mates with a long-time TCDLA member, Gary Trichter. And that was really a milestone in my career for multiple reasons.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you were famous in your own right early on. I mean, I've seen some 70s, 80s shots in your office. I mean, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that it bears mentioning that you have one of the best work ethics of any lawyer I've ever seen. And I mean, obviously that's transitioned into this body of work that started early on.
I don't want to sound like, Bear Bryant or Joe Paterno, but there's no substitute for hard work. And I've learned more from having been a sports writer than I have from all the dusty law books that are in people's libraries. And one of the maxims that I learned early on is that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's why I've always realized that if I'm, working crazy hours, that I'm probably going to be in a better position than my opponent who's not. Because the other thing that I've learned from sports is, like in the criminal justice system, and you and I have talked about this at length, you can't win unless you're in a position to win. Well, that's what the hard work and preparation does. It doesn't guarantee you that you're going to win, and you know as well as I do, particularly doing appellate work on the criminal side, you meet with more rejection than any 50 struggling actors in Hollywood. I mean, it's a tough way to make a living.
Well, speaking of tough ways to make a living and transitioning there, so how did you and the camera get together? Because you have more sound bites than anyone. You're naturally drawn to the camera. The camera's drawn to you. How did your TV career start? And talk a little bit about that.
Well, and one of my favorite movies, Up Close and Personal, Robert Redford tells Michelle Pfeiffer, "You eat the lens." Yeah, I eat the lens.
Well, you've been doing that for what, 25 years?
Yeah, 20 plus years. That was a result of a friendship, and the longer I do this, the more I'm convinced that success is a function of hard work, luck, and relationships. And I was friends with Ron Stone Jr., whose dad was an anchor for Channel 2, the NBC affiliate in Houston, for 30 years. And he knew that I had done a little bit of national stuff with the network at the time that nobody knew about, called Court TV. And that was a function of getting a call from a producer who had seen a couple of my sound bites in a newspaper article. I mean,
wow.
Reporters are funny. They are basically, in large part, not lazy, but lazy. And they look and gravitate towards people who can speak in paragraphs, who can break off a soundbite.
Well, tell people what a soundbite
is.
A
soundbite basically,
like
sure.
You were discovered because of your soundbites in writing.
Well, because my mom always said, I love you, you're one of my favorite sons, but you have a face made for radio. So I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of harsh. A soundbite is doing what we do as appellate lawyers, taking a complicated issue and breaking it down so that a housewife in Pasadena can understand it. And if it's something that somebody will smile at or remember the next day, then you've done a great job. But I had been able to make my way into legal analysis at the national level. And I remember the first trial that I covered at Court TV was Charles Barkley's assault trial, where he threw a heckler through a plate glass window in Milwaukee. And I remember being on with Cynthia McFadden, who went on to greatness at Nightline, and now she's a special correspondent for NBC, and continued to do that. And I look back at some of the tape, and I'm thinking, Paul McCartney called and he wants his hairdo back. I mean, some of this stuff was embarrassing. And even now, it's tough to kind of watch myself. But as a result of that national stuff at this network that pretty much became America's network of record for criminal justice stuff, Ron invited me to see his news director, who had been interested in me because they had just lost their own legal analyst who was going to run for city council. And she's like, okay, you got the job. And I'm thinking, that was easy.
Wow.
And so that was, 1994. And I remember my first real big story was the O.J. Simpson murder trial, and walking into the newsroom and predicting on the air that he was going to be convicted. And I thought, I'm going to get fired. That'll be a nice touch. But yeah, so through TV, it's a great networking device. It's been fun. I've had the opportunity to be on almost every network show imaginable.
Well, let's talk about that. So you're the legal analyst for Channel 2 in Houston.
The NBC affiliate.
And you do national spots?
Yeah, I've been fortunate. Sure, been fortunate enough to be on Good Morning America, and Today, the Early Show, Anderson Cooper, Greta Van Susteren, did Nancy Grace back before we had our falling out after our failed marriage.
Well, let's talk about some of the cases that you've gone on to talk, not just as a legal analyst, but you've represented some high-profile clients. Talk about how, the work ethic that you talked about, your history in criminal law, and then this media talent that you have come together to serve you pretty well, I think.
And I've been blessed because, again, over the course of 2 or 3 decades, finally be able to create a name and reputation and persona, you start getting calls. And I kind of need to segue back before we get to that, because that involved that mysterious mention of Gary Trichter. Gary was instrumental in this organization of getting me on the speaking circuit. That was essential in terms of creating a reputation not just within Houston, but throughout Texas. Because what I found was, by being out there on the lecture circuit for TCDLA, people would call you inevitably for free legal advice, and that's fine because we have a responsibility to give something back. But then they would call you to refer you cases. And as a result of that, creating a niche for myself as kind of one of the go-to guys for appellate and post-conviction, that became important because that was ultimately the foundation. That was one of the forces that kind of drove my ability to get calls from people like Rusty Hardin or Dick DeGuerin or Randy Schaefer on these really big cases.
So once Gary Trichter got you out there, I'm sure there was no stopping you. I mean, everybody knows that you're known for your preservation of error, your paper, your speaking on that topic, and you're very sought after. I mean, you have been for years.
You know, I know it's a cliche, but like most cliches, it's true. We have a responsibility to give something back to the profession. And we've been given superpowers. And you can either use those powers for good or for evil. I've tried to use them most of the time for good. And by being out there and giving something back as a speaker, once again, that ultimately was paying it forward. Because lawyers who knew that I was, again, one of the go-to guys for sitting at the table and making trial objections and keeping the prosecutor and the trial judge honest, it was critical when it came time for finding myself as part of a defense team, whether in the Adrian Peterson case, former Minnesota Vikings, not former, he's still there, Minnesota Vikings all-pro running back, or the late crazy hand surgeon Dr. Michael Brown, the Susan Wright case, a woman who stabbed her abusive husband 193 times and buried him in the backyard, where I actually ended up meeting you. That's another story. And other Tom DeLay.
Well, let's talk about that. Most people don't think appeals are very exciting.
Or sexy.
Or sexy, but you've made them both. I mean, Adrian Peterson, that's exciting. That's sexy.
Well,
Tom DeLay, exciting, less sexy.
Less sexy.
You've represented some pretty heavy hitters, and recently been compared to J.J. Watt yourself in the context of the award that you're going to receive later today. I mean, that's pretty high profile.
Yeah, Ken Hoffman, who's a columnist for the Houston Chronicle and an old friend, wrote a piece the other day, and it's like, J.J. Watt has nothing on Brian Wice when it comes to defense. And I'm like, now that's a soundbite. And so much so that I think you told me that was the only sports analogy you've ever been able to understand in the last quarter century.
Everybody understands J.J.
They absolutely do. Being able to be a part of a team is important because I'm convinced that there's no limit to what anybody can accomplish if at the end of the day you don't care who gets the credit. I got involved in DeLay because Dick DeGuerin had trust in me to take the ball from him in the bottom of the ninth inning after Tom had been convicted. And
sentenced to prison as well.
36 months is awarded to the state of Texas, and you were there through the argument in the Court of Appeals that we won 2-1, and then in the Court of Criminal Appeals that we won 8-1. And the thing about this business, and again, whether it's Tom DeLay or Susan Wright or Adrian Peterson or Michael Brown, whomever, unlike what people do on the civil side, and I have the utmost respect for them, but what we do involves real people and being able to restore their life and their liberty as opposed to, well, gee, who put the lettuce on the floor at HEB?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, high profile, exciting, sexy. Let's talk about something else. You do, not a lot, but you've done some significant pro bono work. I mean, you've helped some people who would not otherwise be out and about and successful in their lives without the work that you did for free.
And I am as proud of the pro bono stuff. More so.
Let's talk about Tran.
Yeah, I mean, Diane Tran is a terrific kid. That's a shrunk wrap version. Diane Tran was a 17-year-old high school student, honor roll student from Willis, Texas, north of Houston, who was supporting her family by working multiple jobs. And unfortunately, sometimes she would miss class, notwithstanding the fact that she was still an honor roll student. And she had been put on probation by a justice of the peace, wasn't a lawyer, and he hauled her into court without notice, without hearing, without counsel, held her in contempt of court, threw her in jail for 24 hours, and I ended up getting a call. And I remember seeing the story on TV thinking, this is wrong. I mean, you're going to make an example out of the good kid and not the thug? And I got a call from Santina Lucci, who's the head booker producer at Good Morning America. And she said, look, you're the go-to guy. Would you be interested in representing her? And I thought, absolutely. And within 24 hours, 36 hours of being on the case, had gone to meet with both the judge and the first assistant DA in Montgomery County, Phil Graham, and convinced them that what had happened was wrong on so many levels. It was illegal, first of all, unlawful, and just wrong, and was able to get her case dismissed, her record sealed. And one of the great things about that case was that because that story went viral, she wound up getting like $80,000 in college donations from all across the world. But the pro bono stuff's important because so much of what I've been able to do with it has been with kids. Not just Diane, who I actually talked to the other day, who's about ready to graduate at Texas A&M, who is, again, just a terrific kid. Kids who most people in this organization in the free world would never know. People like Ashley Bent. You're familiar with a 16-year-old kid, wrong place, wrong time, gang fight in a park in Montrose, who had a split-second decision about whether she wanted to live or die, and stabbed a really scary member of MS-13, kind of like the gold standard for criminal street gangs. And with the help of an incredible pro bono team, Ken Schaefer, Brian Bankin, Robert Hirschhorn picking the jury, we tried that case, got a mistrial, and ultimately, when the state filed a gag order request, I went to the Court of Appeals, got the gag order set aside, because we were killing them in the court of public opinion. We had a 16-year-old defendant who looked like Angelina Jolie, and they had a dead MS-13 gangster. And
I'm pretty sure you guys had a special piece on Channel 2.
We did.
Ahead of jury selection?
Right. Yeah, within 72 hours of jury selection, being able to take Houston's top-rated anchor, who not coincidentally also works at the station that I work at, for a little walkthrough of Ashley's grandparents' house, which didn't hurt. But the turning point in that case was getting the gag order set aside, written by a 36-page opinion written by Justice Eva Guzman, who's now on the Texas Supreme Court, and it's the gold standard for gag orders in criminal cases.
I mean, it's still the most
It's
recent
still
case cited in it.
Yeah, it's still the case. And we were able to come back and cut a deal for 21 months probation. And Ashley is now a mom and doing well. And again, it's not just that you turn around a kid's life, but you can save it, and then represented for free.
Well, let's talk about Robbins, also a pro bono venture. One of the reasons that you're being honored today, one of many cases you've worked, but talk a little bit about the facts of that case.
I've been involved in Neil Robbins since 1998. Neil was convicted of capital murder in Montgomery County, Conroe, north of Houston, for killing his girlfriend's 17-month-old toddler. The evidence was less than overwhelming as to both the manner and means. And I got hired to do the direct appeal and lost, got PDR granted and lost, and then figured that's it. You chalk it up into the loss column. And then 8 years later, got a phone call from the Montgomery County DA's office saying there's, as you say in TV, breaking news. The medical examiner who testified as to cause and manner of death had decided that with her increased training, experience, and expertise, she could no longer stand behind either her testimony as to the cause or manner of death. So I filed a writ and claimed that that's just a violation of due process. It's just not right. We get a do-over if evidence essential to the conviction has now been discredited or at least undermined or questioned. And we were in discovery for 2.5 years. Judge Mike Mays, a veteran jurist in Montgomery County, had wanted to make sure that the record that went to the Court of Criminal Appeals was as full and complete as possible. And he appointed a special master to help us through the medical issues, because the only thing I know about medical legal issues is what I've seen on reruns of CSI and Criminal Minds. And got to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and I'm thinking, this is a gimme.
Well, no, so relief was recommended
By the trial judge?
court.
And I'm thinking, again, this is a no-brainer. This isn't a closed case. And one of the great regrets that I had was not asking for oral argument, because I had given what I thought was such a compelling argument in the trial court. And June of 2011, 1 minute after 9, when you click on the Court of Criminal Appeals website, I saw that I had lost 5-4. And what made it tough, I mean, again, we lose all the time in this business. But the only thing I can liken it to is being a kid on the playground and having somebody punch you in the stomach and losing your wind. And what made it tough was that the majority opinion was written by someone who I thought was probably one of my best friends on the Court of Criminal Appeals, Larry Myers. And it was devastating. Devastating. And you, at that point, can either kind of curl up in a ball and be defeated and watch Oprah at 3 o'clock, or you can get back up off your feet and do what big-time players do, and that's make big-time plays. And I was able, with the help of a bunch of people from this organization, and from the Innocence Project of Texas and the National Innocence Project, people like Jeff Blackburn, Gary Udishin, Mike Ware, Scott Henson, Shirley Bacchus-Lobel, Angela Moore, Bryce Benjett. We went to the legislature and convinced the legislature to enact Article 1107.3 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Huge. Not only one of the first statutes of its kind, but one of the most encompassing. It's been a national model. And it basically provides a fail-safe mechanism against convictions that are based on junk science and junk scientists. And I remember testifying on a beautiful March day in Austin, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I was like Bluto in Animal House. I mean, it was not at all what I had anticipated it would be. And the bill passed committee and made it past both houses of the legislature. It became law, and now I'm thinking, fine, we're back in business. Went back to Judge Mays' court, and once again got favorable fact findings. Went back to the CCA, argued it in March of 2014, and I know you were there.
Based on a bill that was named the Robbins bill.
It was, yeah,
right?
it was pretty much, without it being expressly called the Neil Robbins bill. I think everybody in the courtroom, except for maybe Judge Myers, recognized that that's what it was.
And the outrage associated with his denial of relief.
Yeah, the notion being that if due process isn't offended by testimony that's essential to the conviction, that does not, because it cannot withstand the test of time. That's just wrong. And I remember arguing it in March of 2014 and finding out the following November of 2014 that we had won 5-4. And just when you think...
Still an extremely close margin.
Way too close for comfort. And
in light of a change in the law just for this case to ensure that the right result occurred.
And it wasn't just a change in the law that became a dramatic factor. A change in the court. Because as you know, 6 weeks later, 3 of the 5 judges in the majority left the court. And the state did what I would have probably done in the same situation. They kind of ran the shot clock out by filing a motion-free hearing. And I was obviously concerned that the 3 new judges would have a radically different take. And we sat and we watched and we waited for something to happen. I remember you and I coming off the set of Good Morning America in May of 2015 when we found out what we had pretty much expected, that the court had granted the state's motion-free hearing and had set it for argument like 4 weeks later. And went back, argued it the day after my birthday, June 3rd, and I'm thinking, am I going to be one of the few lawyers in America that loses the same case twice? And God willing, fast forward, pan forward, January of this year, you and I were in Austin for another seminar, the Advanced Criminal Law Planning Committee meeting, and happened to go by the Court of Criminal Appeals, sitting in the office of Abel Acosta, the chief clerk, and at 1 minute of 9, I'll never forget it, he's like, slide something across the table and says, you probably need to take a look at this. And you remember, I mean, we saw that they had dismissed the state's motion as improvidently granted by a vote of 8-1, and, I remember what I did. It was like Johnny Drama and Entourage. Victory! and that's a big deal, because the impact that Robbins has on the jurisprudence in this state, I don't think has really been measured quite yet. But people like Mike Ware and Keith Hampton have used Article 1107.3 to obtain relief for defendants in cases where justice certainly may not have miscarried, but it certainly took spring break off.
Now, anybody that watches 48 Hours knows that there's a problem with the science and the scientists in our community meeting up with our criminal law. And we really are, as you said, it cannot be overstated how important 11073 is, and we lead the nation in that jurisprudence as a result of the work that you did for Robbins pro bono.
And make no mistake, it was a team effort. It was a total team effort. And I think of what Mark Twain said about experts. You know, experts just some guy from out of town. And it wasn't until I became immersed in Robbins that I saw that in the 21st century that forensic experts are the high priests of the courtroom because of the CSI effect. These people come in and they're cloaked in this mantle, this aura, this patina of credibility. And like I said, they're just people with a degree and a white coat.
Well, there's no question that you've impacted the jurisprudence of Texas, in the nation, I mean, in the 35 years you've practiced. Today, you're going to get the 2016 Percy Foreman Lawyer of the Year Award. How does it feel?
You know, I
It's
don't
the
know.
Gatorade of, where are we?
I
How
don't
does
know.
it feel
I mean,
to be recognized by your peers? I mean, for this body of work?
Well, when you say body of work, it's like a Lifetime Achievement Award. They're going to come get me out of the old people's home.
Well, I think that I say that only because I say maybe it's Robbins, but maybe it's Tom DeLay, maybe it's Adrian Peterson. I mean,
Maybe
you've
it's
had
Diane
so
Tran.
many-
Maybe
right.
you don't
You've
ever
had
know.
so many successes, and you've been so fortunate in that regard over the last year that, you know, it's hard to pinpoint. Obviously, Ex parte Robbins is huge, but I would think it has to do with a lot more than just that. I mean, again, you do have a body of work, and so this is your peers recognizing that.
And I'm blessed because I remember receiving this award locally in 2010 through the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, an organization of which you're the president. And look, recognition by your peers is always
Across
huge.
the state. I mean,
But now on a more global level,
Sure.
look, the people who are the backbone of this organization, the people who followed in Percy Foreman's footsteps, people like Richard Haynes, Dick and Mike DeGuerin, Randy and Ken Schaefer, Mike Heiskell, Tim Evans, Betty Blackwell. I mean, these people, they're my peers, and I'm grateful. They're also my heroes and my role models because I don't care how old you are. You're never too old. You should never become jaundiced where you don't have people who you look to. And these are the people who took my phone calls, bought me cocktails at CLE events, were always there for me, and to be able to be recognized by them with an award that carries the name of the Babe Ruth of criminal lawyers. Look, it obviously means a tremendous amount. I'm not really sure it sunk in. But being here and sitting down with you and getting ready and a couple of hours to stand up in front of these folks who are fellow warriors is something that it's difficult really to put into words. I mean, it's not often that I'm speechless. But thinking about the magnitude of all this, because it seems like last week I left the Board of Criminal Appeals. It seems last week Tony Canales was saying, no, you're not going to pass an FBI background check. And it's all gone by so quickly, but it also has been so meaningful to me on so many levels. Look, you save one soul, you can save the world. And whether it's rescuing a cat from a storm drain on Louisiana Street, which actually happened last week, or saving Ashley Benton or Diane Tran, Latrell Turner, who in the words of Merle Haggard, turned 21 in prison doing life without parole, came in, argued his case at the 11th hour, and was able to win a new trial based on jury selection error, jury charge error, and ultimately got a resentencing and new trial where he's eventually going to get out of TDC, not necessarily in a coffin. It's the kids and the people who are damned and downtrodden who ultimately motivate me in terms of what I've been able to do over the last 35 years.
Well, and TCDLA is obviously a great network of mentors and mentees, and you talked about Gary Trichter and how he kind of helped you get out there. And I know you've written articles about mentoring. You've mentored me throughout my career. what would you recommend to somebody who's looking to you for some guidance or some, outlook on things as they go forward in the criminal defense bar here in Texas?
Well, if anybody watches this and they happen to be high school students, college students, law students, even people who have yet to pass the bar and kind of go out there and make their mark, if you have to love what you do, because life's too short to hate your job. You have to have passion, because without it, you're an imposter. And what's so funny is that I almost didn't get into law school. I mean, I was a 3.65 undergrad at U of H, but I didn't test one on the LSAT. I mean, I filled in my name right and got 200 points for that. But I just think how funny it is, how ironic that I came within a coat of paint and maybe not going to law school and working at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. But the point is this: if you're in college, take courses that you love, that you'll be able to do well in. Writing, acting, drama, and public speaking, because if ultimately you want to do what we do, that's what matters. But once you become a lawyer, create a niche for yourself, whether it's expunctions or DWI or appellate or post-conviction or extradition or immigration. Make yourself needed, make yourself necessary, become the go-to guy, become the go-to gal. And if you can do that, then you'll be in a position where people will have your name in their Rolodex and on speed dial. I've been blessed to be able to do what I do for 35 years. It's even in the darkest of times, and you've been there with me, when you get punched in the stomach and you lose, you know that ultimately you got to get back up, because big-time players make big-time plays.
So let's close it up with this. I know you use the phrase made guys from time to time. You're the ultimate made guy. So is it possible for everybody else to be part of that group? Do you consider yourself to be among these men that you've talked about?
And women.
And women who are part of the Lawyer of the Year and who've been part of this group for so long? I mean, where do you consider yourself in made guys context?
It's always difficult to kind of, look through the prism of one's life. Then you kind of sound like your Dr. Phil. But, the expression made guy, it's a mob expression. It meant that, you were a member of a crew and a family, and nobody could clip you unless they sat down and got permission, all of which comes from Goodfellas. But it's like in the mob, and I'm not being, funny. It's about respect. It's about your fellow criminal defense attorneys and judges and prosecutors all across Texas, knowing that you've made it, that you've earned it, and that nothing's been given to you. And that's why, having been honored to become a special prosecutor, and I said I would kind of bring this all full circle, in the Ken Paxton case, it's knowing that people count on you to do the right thing for the right reason, to make sure the playing field's level, and make sure that regardless of whom you're an advocate for, that the process is fair and the result reliable. I hope that the people in this organization and the people who will be in the audience and watching, when I get my award, recognize that I accept that award on their behalf. That you like Sir Isaac Newton said, he saw further than anybody because he stood on the shoulders of giants. And whether it's the people who were there for me on a personal level, or the people who were there for me on a professional level, there's no end, there's no limit, nothing is impossible. Like Muhammad Ali said, impossible is an impossible. It's an imposter. It's a dare. And what we do on a daily basis, when I stand up there in a couple of hours, I'm going to tell people, look, we have that ability to change and save people's lives. And that anytime any one of us, anywhere in Texas, walks into any courtroom and tells an overzealous cop or an overbearing prosecutor or an overzealous judge, before you get to my client, you're going to have to get through me. And that's what makes this all so meaningful, all so memorable, all so special. And it's also knowing that my mom and dad won't be there in person, but they'll be there in spirit. That's what makes me, I'm going to lose it here. able to do what I do, knowing that I've honored their memory by doing what I did here today.